It was official. They entered the Twilight Zone. Yang knew it when she cracked her eyes open and could see Jaune stood above her. It wasn't that his presence was unusual, but the fact he was awake before her, or any of them. What also set off alarm bells was the fact he was in full armor. But neither his presence, nor his outfit made her gasp as loud as the bucket he held in his hands. His wide grin didn't help either. "Time to wake up," he shouted, and upended it above her. Ice-cold water dashed against her skin, prompting a sharp intake of breath and a scream that could have woken the dead, but settled for Blake and Weiss instead. Both were trained huntresses in their own right and ready for action. So it came as no surprise when their immediate reaction to being woken up was to consider it a threat. Weiss slashed out with one fist at the air above her, while Blake rolled off her bed, tackled the floor and head-butted it into submission. "What is that racket?" Weiss gasped, one hand on her heart as she looked around the room with wide eyes. They narrowed when she spotted Jaune, empty bucket in hand. "Jaune? What on remnant are you doing?" "Waking you up," he said, and then blinked and pointed down at Yang's chest, or rather, what the cold water had done to a certain part of her anatomy. "Someone's looking perky this morning," Yang would admit to a small amount of satisfaction when her cushion hit him with all her strength, especially when he let out a loud oof and collapsed to his knees. She drew the sheets up over her chest, then scowled and tossed them aside when it just made her wetter. "I'm going to get changed," she growled. "Stay there and be ready to die when I return." "Ugh, wear your combat gear," Jaune groaned. "Not your uniform." "Why?" "You'll need it." Yang glowered suspiciously at him, but did as he commanded. Returning from the bathroom in time to see Jaune stood facing a wall, and the other two getting changed. "Not having a shower?" she asked. "No point," Jaune said. "Your weapon is on your bed, by the way." "Those were in my locker." She reached down and picked them up, quickly strapping them onto her arm. "Do I even want to ask how you broke into my locker?" "Probably not." "Do I even want to ask why I'm not the slightest bit surprised you can break into it?" She grumbled. Somehow, it didn't surprise her at all, even if it would have required her scroll or password, both of which were firmly kept on her person. Ugh, forget it. It's like 7 in the morning on a weekend. Why are we even awake? Why did you go steal our weapons? "I didn't steal them." "You broke into our lockers." I gave them back." She could feel a headache forming, the way he acted, not to mention the grin she could see, even with him standing with his back to her. It reminded her all too much of how he'd been back when Beacon started. It was an ominous sign. "Can I turn around yet?" Yang looked to the others to see that they were all changed, but shook her head anyway. "No, you get to stand in the naughty corner and think about what you did." He turned around and rolled his eyes at her. "Cute. Anyway, are you all ready?" "Ready for what?" Weiss sighed. "Jaune, you snuck in, woke us up, soaked Yang and basically threw our weapons at us. We need more explanation than that. What are we supposed to be ready for?" Jaune smirked. It wasn't a happy thing, nor was it amused. It looked like the kind of smile a mass murderer might wear a second before he started chopping. "Training," he cheered. That was around the time Yang decided that yes, it definitely was the Twilight Zone they entered, and no, it wasn't about to get any better. "Training," Weiss repeated, as though she expected she had misheard him. "You, Jaune, laziest man in Beacon, are suggesting that we train?" "Yep." Weiss looked over to her and then to Blake. Neither of them had an answer for the sudden shift in his behavior, except that they could all agree it was suspicious as hell. Why? Weiss asked. Her eyes narrowed into tiny slits. I want to see my team soar to new heights, Jaune preached. He held his hands wide before him, eyes pointed towards the ceiling. I've reached an epiphany in which I can see our potential realized. Our distant capabilities test. A pillow to the face cut him off. Nice shot, Yang said. Blake smiled back. Jaune, Weiss sighed. Please. It's too early for this. Assuming you haven't been abducted by aliens and brainwashed, can we have the actual reason? Their leader's smile fell, replaced by a more serious expression. We have a mission coming up, he said. The midterm missions? Yang stifled a yawn behind one hand. Yeah, I heard about them. They shouldn't be too hard though. We can handle it without waking up early for training. Not this one, Jaune said. I'll tell you about it after, I promise. Let's just say we're getting a special mission. That caught her attention. Why would they have a special mission? Or was it just that Jaune called it such when it was something else entirely? Either way, they didn't answer the big question. How do you know what mission we have? Blake asked. Isn't that restricted information? Yang groaned. Oh my god. You hacked into the beacon servers? We are so expelled. Actually, no. Let's just say a big, drunken, middle-aged crisis-suffering bird told me. Weiss and Blake looked confused, but Yang felt no such emotion. She sighed instead and palmed her forehead. I thought you smelled like booze. You went out drinking with my uncle. Yep. Then again, the smell didn't come from the drink. Would you believe me if I said his entire room stinks of booze? She would, if only because she had the misfortune of visiting his home and patch. Anyway, he went on. Your uncle is going to be the official huntsman that gets assigned to our mission, and he's told me a little bit of what it's about. You mentioned that a little last night. Weiss mumbled, then panicked when Yang's ears silvered over to her. Last night? Had Weiss spoken to Jaune? So, what's the mission about? Weiss asked, almost too anxious to divert the attention. I'll tell you after training, Jaune said. You'll be too exhausted to think about it anyway. That sounds like a challenge, Yang said. If I recall, you're the one with poor fitness around here. Do you really think you'll be able to keep up with your young and fresh daughters? Let alone wear us out. Jaune's responding grin was filled with far too much malice. Oh, I won't be the one in charge of your training, he said. I enlisted a little help with that. The door to their room slammed open, Nora practically rolling into the room. She came to stop before Jaune, hands planted on her hips and a smile bright enough to rival the sun. Right, maggots, Nora yelled. I've been made aware there are 3 girls in the need of personal training. Are you ready to sweat? Nora? Yang tilted her head to the side. Somehow, it didn't surprise her in the slightest that Jaune would outsource the task to someone else. She was surprised he bothered to wake them up in the first place. Still, how bad could it be? Man, my wrist really hurts, Jaune said, working his left wrist with his other hand. He made sure to keep his eyes on his teammates and to suppress his grin. He wasn't sure he was very successful, but they always said it was the thought that counted, right? I mean, wow. Making all those pancakes really did a number on me. Yang growled and weakly threw a fist in his direction. It impacted limply on the cafeteria table. Blake might have also thought about saying something rude, but she gave up after trying to push her face off the wood and finding the effort too much. Weiss just sat there, still shaking slightly. "Nora?" Ren asked with a knowing expression. "Nora." Jaune nodded happily. "I asked her to help with a little training session for my team in exchange for pancakes. Honestly, it amazes me how far I'm willing to go for them. Someone should get me a medal." Yang's fist knocked over a cup as she tried to sliver it over to knock him out. It bumped against his arm, then, when that didn't do the necessary damage, gave up entirely. "I think what we're all wondering is just why you felt that was necessary," Pyrrha said. "At least, I think I'm interpreting Yang's groans correctly." Jaune would have said they had more swear words in them really, probably ones that compared his face to various examples of fecal matter. Still, it wasn't without a good reason, and they did need to be prepared. If I thought some last-minute training would be enough to help me, I'd have joined in. Not that the morning's training would help them at Mountain Glen. It was too soon and they wouldn't make any meaningful improvement in a day or two. It would prompt them towards making their own preparations, however, and also to improve before the festival and the nightmare that would begin there. "The missions are coming up," he explained, not only for the benefit of Team Reuben, but his own as well. "I happened to spend some time with a certain uncle of Yang's and Ruby's, who revealed that he's taking us on a mission. He also suggested we get some last-minute preparations in." "Uncle Crow told you what your mission was?" Ruby gasped, with the kind of expression that said her uncle was going to see a very pouty, very betrayed girl at his door in the next few hours. "He didn't tell me what ours was." That aside, Pyrrha smiled and patted her partner's head. "Was this really a necessary response? The missions are all fairly standard from what I understand. We even have a huntsman or huntress to accompany us. If it's just fighting Grim, they should be more than capable." They would be, if we were fighting Grim. His words were enough to bring some life back to the girls, who pushed themselves up into seated positions. Their faces were red, eyes even more so, and they took great gulps of air. Nora really did push you hard if you let her. He should know. He spent some repeats asking her to train him every day. "You said before that you'd tell us." "It better be good enough to warrant this," Yang threatened. Blake didn't join in, but her narrowed eyes promised the same, if not worse, should he not have a good reason. Fortunately, he did. Jaune leaned forward and kept his voice low. "Crow wants us to hunt Roman Torchwick and the White Fang." It was like a bomb going off. The table fell into complete silence, instantly dispelled as Blake gasped and sat straight. Pyrrha choked on her drink and Weiss slammed a hand down. "What?" Weiss gasped. "Are they insane? Why would they ask us to do something like that?" "Is this because of what happened at the warehouse?" Yang asked, receiving a nod from him. "Eesh. I guess that just keeps coming back to bite us." "What do you mean hunting them down though?" "I mean just that," he said. After your little jaunt against the White Fang, Crow apparently captured some of their members who they interrogated. There's something going on in a place called Mountain Glen. What? I don't know. He added to Blake's almost immediate attempt to ask a question. She frowned and sat back down. "That's what we're to find out, or so I gather. We're going to sneak in with Crow, and the place is grim infested, by the way. Then we're going to look for signs of White Fang activity and trace them back to Torchwick." "And then what?" Ruby asked nervously. "Are you meant to fight him?" "We're not meant to, but we'll almost certainly end up doing so." "I doubt it," he said instead, more than aware of his hypocrisy. "We're probably just there to locate him and see what's happening so that your uncle can call in the reinforcements. Still, we're going to be going up against Grim, White Fang, and a dangerous criminal." Hence the rather abrupt workout. Weiss sighed. Our enemies are going to be far stronger than what we're used to. That means I can't be angry at you for the training. Yang sighed. He rolled his eyes at how disappointed she sounded. Still, why give this to people like us? We're only students. It's because of who we are, isn't it? Blake's question brought everyone's attention to her. The black-haired faunus frowned and looked at each of them. We're one of the stronger teams of the year, but still below older ones. One thing we have, however, is experience fighting against all of those three things. Bingo! Jaune made a firing motion at her with his thumb and finger. The girls looked at one another and began to talk between themselves and the other team about what that might mean and how dangerous it could be. Jaune watched from the outskirts, mind already wearing. Telling them couldn't hurt, in fact, might even help. They always finished the mission safely, however, but going in aware of what they might face would only make it go smoother. It wasn't that he was going back on his promise and not get involved against Cinder. He would still live this life for his team and family. That wouldn't mean anything if he let them get killed early by goofing off. In other repeats, when I went here, I tried my best to succeed. I'll have to do the same now, if only to make sure I don't drag them down and get them killed. Honestly, he didn't think it would be too hard. Crow had mentioned the idea of preparation, which was something he agreed with and planned to make use of. Sometimes the biggest difference between something working or failing was how much preparation you were willing to put in. That would go doubly for him, given his current state. Right now, I'm probably skilled enough to hold off or delay Torchwick on Neo, but they still outpace me. They're stronger, faster, and have more stamina. Critically, however, they didn't expect Team Jazzberry. They couldn't prepare because they didn't know their operation was going to be rumbled. Given that it was his only advantage, he was prepared to take real advantage of it. Upping his team's training was just the first step. He'd make Roman remember this. We're going to need to get some supplies, Jaune said, rejoining the conversation. From what I gather, we'll be out for a few days, so camping equipment would make our life easier. We need information too, Weiss agreed. I, for one, am not familiar with this Mountain Glen place. You won't find any. Mountain Glen was a failed settlement. My mother was a survivor, he added by the way of explanation. She told me what I know about it. Right. Weiss looked down at her food. Well, I needed to go and stock up on dust in town anyway. I suppose we could all go together to pick up supplies. You three can. I have to go to a meeting with Crow about the mission. He made a dismissive motion with one hand. Nothing serious. Just some stuff he wants to talk about. Probably mission related. You'll tell us later? Of course. Weiss nodded and seemed happy to accept it. We can pick up some camping gear for you then, she said. Is there anything in particular you want? Sleeping bag, pack, and some decent tasting rations, Jaune said. He took out his card and handed it to her. My PIN is 7389. I'll message it to your scroll too. Oh, sharing bank accounts already. Yang teased. Her face went white a second later as she no doubt remembered that things weren't quite as they were before. The blonde looked like she just swallowed her own foot and knew it. Her eyes darting over to see Weiss's reaction. It's fine, Weiss said, a smile in place. Even if it wasn't quite all there. Don't worry, Yang. She pushed his card into her skirt. We'll get what basic supplies we can, and also some cooking equipment to share between one another. I'll do my best to stop Yang from splurging all your money on trash. Make sure Blake doesn't spend it on porn either, he said, grinning as said girl flushed him a furious, unimpressed look. I'll do my best. Weiss laughed and led them away. She's still a little awkward around me. It's not as bad as it was before though. I guess Yang and Blake really did help her. I owe them. Do you know when you need to go on your mission? Pyrrha interrupted his thoughts. From what I can recall, we won't even find out what ours is until tomorrow. Officially, we're the same. We'll be assigned our mission tomorrow and go on it just about straight after. The only difference is our huntsman told us 2 days early. I guess so. I wonder what our mission will be. Hopefully, the same mission Team Juniper had received in previous lives. That shouldn't be hard since the location was important to Ren. He'd probably pick it out this time as well, and Ruby being Ruby, she wouldn't turn down his request. Really. Everything should just turn out the same. I hope it does anyway. We really need them there when the breach hits. Otherwise, they would be exhausted, injured, and low on aura when a bucketload of Grim landed in the middle of the city. Maybe it would be wise to add a little extra security there. I've got to go anyway, he said, pushing himself up from the table. I have to go and have a chat with a certain bird, gather some supplies, and then meet with the headmaster. I'll see you all later, I guess. Good luck in your mission if we don't see you. Pyrrha smiled. Yeah, kick ass and take names. Nora cheered. Oh, and bring me back a souvenir. I love a Beowulf. You'd love a Beowulf. Huh. I'll see what I can do, Nora.